I want to welcome you to the October 2021 textual study on Bible and Beyond discussions. I am your host, Shirley Paulson, and our presenter this evening is Dr. Hal Taussig. In this study, we'll be talking about humor and joy in the Gospels of Mark, Thomas, Matthew, and Luke. There are quite a number of pithy sayings in these Gospels that were probably part of the oral lore generations before the Gospels were written. They contain jokes, teases, and joy. Some probably composed by Jesus, and many others not. We'll look for the ways humor and joy are the bedrock of creativity, counter-identity, community development, and even healing. I also want to mention that we encourage and appreciate an ongoing pledge of support that you can do with Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Bible and Beyond to make a monthly pledge that's just right for you. You can also make a one-off donation using PayPal or a check if you prefer. And thanks so much, and Hal, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Shirley, for bringing us all together, and appreciate all of you coming tonight to a new topic that we have not had in the last 2 years. And so I'm eager to have us work on it together. Let me just say a few words about the topic of, I keep changing the exact title, but the topic of humor, comedy, and meaning making would be probably what I mean to intersect with what we're calling the Bible and beyond. That is, I want to propose to us that the Bible has humor throughout its texts. I want to say that probably, like I would say most healthy human beings, between 20 and 40% of the Bible is humor and comedy. That for me is very close to the possibility that we can find meaning in our lives. And I think we depend as human beings on comedy and humor as a major part of how we figure out what life means, who we are, what our identity is. And so tonight, I'm going to have us look just specifically at some texts. Again, I want to say that there are hundreds, probably thousands of comical texts in the Bible, and then what we call beyond the Bible, meaning the extra canonical texts as well. I don't find really any major difference between who is less comical, the canon or the non-canon. They all seem to me to be fairly healthy in terms of a big chunk of comedy and humor. I want to, however, say that I think there are some pretty somber and goofy and hurtful texts in the Bible and beyond as well. So I'm not wanting to say that all is light and joy in all of the texts that are in the Bible and all of the texts that we've been discovering beyond the Bible in the text of the first couple of centuries. If I might be right, and I hope that you will challenge me in my proposal here, but if I might be right, I would be in a big problem in that I couldn't get to very many of the texts. One of the main things, of course, is that lots of comedy and lots of humor is different in different cultures. Mm-hmm. So just because comedy and humor is, I would say, essential to us knowing who we are and to us finding meaning in our lives. That doesn't answer too many questions, especially since we are in those of us who read the Bible and those who of us who read beyond the Bible, we are cross-cultural. If we have a chance of getting real deeply into meaning making in the Bible, we have to cross a number of cultures and of course a huge space of time to encounter these texts in some parts of what they do for us. So that means that I probably will get to maybe 3 or 4 texts tonight that are, I think, comical. And I think they're mostly comical in the texts as they were written in the first several centuries of the Common Era. In other words, one of the most boring parts of tonight will be I will be explaining jokes that we don't get. And since that's the case, it may be that I'm just playing a trick on all of us in that maybe I haven't got it either. So we always go at our times together every Monday night of each month with challenges and possibilities. And this is, I want to say, one of the most challenging and one of the most possible that we have taken on in a long time. I'm going to stop right now, as we always do, and see if any of you would like to respond to what I've said so far. What do you think about comedy and humor? I'll add joy sometimes in relationship to you and to the Bible and beyond. I'm not hearing you.
Start my day with the comics in the newspaper, because they make me laugh and they make me stop taking myself so seriously. And I'm really looking forward to help in doing that with the Bible.
Oh, I think that's one of my main options too. Katie? Did you want to say something?
Sorry, no, I was just laughing.
Okay. No one's allowed to laugh tonight. Thank you. I do also want to say something about what you said, Margaret, in addition to saying, I think we're on similar pages. And I would want to say that primarily I'm interested in comedy in this regard and in humor, not because it's light, but because it's deep. And I guess getting back to you and the comics, I suspect that comics have an amazing way of sneaking up on us about things we need to really think about and that we need to go deeper on. Sometimes what we need to go deeper on is so scary, painful, and challenging that one of the great things I want to say is that comedy and humor makes us hear things that we don't think are too hurtful or problematic, but they almost always, in a comic, there's almost always some crisis. Okay, well, I'm going to then just start off with one of these texts, and they're all very very small texts, I'm going to this evening, and this is only just because of kind of arbitrariness. This evening, I'm going to take texts that are supposed to be from Jesus. That is, that these would be texts that are from Gospels, and I've chosen 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Thomas. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Thomas. I hope to get to one text from each of us and give us time to talk about these. So the first one I'm going to read is from the Gospel of Mark. It's the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7, verse 15. Chapter 7, verse 15 is so short that I can read it a couple of times, and you don't have to get out your Bible at all, but if you want to, please do. Nothing that enters people from the outside makes people dirty. The things that are dirty are what comes out of people. I'll read that again. Nothing that enters people from the outside makes people dirty. The things that are dirty are what comes out of people. I'm wanting to propose that this text is funny. And so here's me telling a joke that you don't think is funny, I don't think, but let me see if you think it's funny. Did anyone laugh or start to laugh or stop laughing or tried not to laugh when I read that text? Ken.
I
Or
don't
not
think,
Ken?
I never thought of it before as funny, but I can see it's because it's the unexpected. It's, humor comes often from an unexpected incident or phrasing, and he's sort of turning things inside out or upside down and showing you the reverse. So that I could see how you could get a smile out of it.
Thank you. So I think the type of humor that this is quite, here's my first hint. This is potty humor by Jesus. Okay, good. We got the first laughter. This is potty humor. I'm living a lot these days with my 12-year-old grandson, and there's nothing like potty humor for, I'm going to say, from 3 until 15. And some of us are still hanging on to it. But let me walk us through it. Would anyone like to, now that I've given you a hint, say what the text is saying? Okay, all right. So
Those are the jokes my husband tells, not me.
well, it's really just two, as most good jokes are, it's really only 2 sentences. Nothing that makes us dirty comes from the outside. What is dirty is what comes out of us from the inside.
It's how you think about it. Can't hurt you or defile you, as the King James Version says, only if you let it or think it can defile you.
Yeah, I think that holds on, but you're not getting into potty territory yet.
No, I'd say that everything that comes out of the body stinks. I mean, obviously, just think about it. Everything that comes out of the body stinks.
Okay, yeah, right. Oh, could you say a little bit more about that? I may be missing a couple of pieces of humor.
Well, have you ever noticed if something is inside your body and it comes out? I mean, maybe, you know, blood smells like metal, so maybe that's not stinking. But if you're vomiting, if you're pooping or peeing, or there's something in your belly button that's coming out, whatever it does, if it comes from the inside and goes out, it smells bad.
That's great. Yeah. So in other words, we're really just talking about excrement, poop, urine, and piss is the main thing that Jesus is thinking about when this is being thought through. And again, it's not exactly that we have to hold the teller of this joke too highly about whether it's really the case or not. What I think need to do is notice that most of us do feel dirty at points in our life that has a lot to do with excrement, poop, urine, and piss. So now that I've got all of the profundities going, I want to say just lay this out a little bit more in what's at stake here. So there is within early people of Israel, there is some worry about whether you're clean enough. And when you look carefully at the amazing things in the First Testament or Hebrew scripture, you'll note there's a fair amount of anxiety about being dirty. And that it doesn't take you too much to notice that that's mostly based within excrement, and then it just elaborates itself a lot. And the reason it seems to me that Jesus is interested in this is people are around him that are saying, yes, aren't we just all so dirty? Isn't it terrible how much humans are dirty? And this is just who we are. Of course, there's actually Christianity that did a better job of that than the people of Israel by far, I think. That is, Christians saying how dirty they are. I think they pulled that off. We've pulled that off better than the people of Israel. But there is this regular thing going on in most peoples about that. And what this little aphorism is saying is simply, it's making fun of us thinking about how dirty we are. And is arguing with it with a wink. So I want to just then, I just want to hear what's going on as you think about this.
Wasn't it basically the concept of what goes into your mouth, whether or not it was more like defile than make you dirty? And I think what Jesus did is he sort of like switched it.
Right.
He made, instead of thinking in terms of so much of your dietary habits, It's like, don't worry so much about your dietary habits. Think more about what comes out of you, what comes out of your mouth. That's not quite so clean. or that actually can defile you because of the thought that's behind your words. That's sort of like, I get more of a feeling. It's more like a defilement that he's talking about than clean. Of course, like you're saying, they were always worried about cleanliness, etc. But it was also their whole thing of being defiled versus purification. I just finished a Bible study on Genesis, where it goes on a lot in certain chapters about something happened to somebody and it defiled them. Not just that they were unclean, they were defiled. And, they had to go through a whole purification ceremony or something.
Yeah, there's so much good in what you're holding up there. And I want to just identify it. First of all, the word defile, basically, another way of saying it is being made dirty. So yes, this is all about how we are made dirty and what does it, and how much damage does it do to us. Let's just remember that it is in terms of the people of Israel of that era, there is a lot of attention to whether your food is clean. But there's also a lot of attention to whether your body's clean. And so that's the focus of that. And then that gets elaborated into the social body of all people many times in those kind of conversations. And this is where, and there, as I said, there are 4 versions of this Jesus text. The one I gave you is the only one that I would say this is the first one, the earliest one, because actually almost all of the others, the other 3, hold on to the basic structure of these 2 sentences, but they try to get away from excrement. What I want to say is Jesus knows that the heart of this funniness is when you get close to excrement. Yes, so some of the later versions of this, I would say, they want to only talk about how you can be dirty by what you say. Mark's version doesn't do that, but Mark simply has the heart of it, just wanting to remember what the real dirt is that we get into, and that's excrement. In other words, what if we could laugh about that? I want to suggest that this question about whether we're dirty or not is a pretty serious question for most people. I don't wish people had that, but a lot of people do. So I'm going to let this lay after anyone else wants to say a little bit more, and then we'll go on to a next text.
I think Joy brought up a good point in the chat here, Hal, where she's pointing out that the following verses in Mark, the listeners don't seem to get the joke either, and he's explaining it. Why do you think that if it was meant to be a joke, that the people he tells the joke to wouldn't understand it as a joke?
I think some get it immediately, but yes, that the bigger question there in that part of Mark is who is dirty and why. So that discussion goes on to get to other kinds of dirtiness. And what Jesus wants to say is, get serious. You're the shittiest people in town. And that's just because you have excrement.
I'd like to say too, to Shirley's question, if Jesus were standing in front of you today and said that, would you get it? Meaning, with what we know about Jesus, would we assume he was talking about excrement? Probably not. So I get the fact that the people think, oh, that Jesus wouldn't say that, so he must mean something else, right?
Yeah, but I'm myself, I give a lot of his hearers a lot more credit for having better sense of humor about Jesus than we do. In
Al?
other words, but I may be wrong about that. Okay,
I
so
noticed, yeah.
no, go ahead.
I noticed that when you read it, I felt immediately that a Sunday school class would be roaring. And then I looked down at the, I have the Common English Bible in front of me, and it's much more decorous. I don't think reading that you'd begin to think of excrement at all.
Yeah,
It's
and it's
interesting how the translations vary.
Right. But I think you're exactly right, Sarah. And it seems to me that it's because of the translation. The translators wouldn't dare use that kind of language.
But as they notice when he goes on to the other, immediate following, when he's talking to just the disciples, he does talk about the sewer. So I think at that point, oh yeah, all.
Yeah.
We got it.
Right. Now, before we go on just a little, before we go on a little bit, I want to just think just a little bit about humorousness itself and how many different kinds of humor there are. There are quips, there are hidden transcripts in which hardly anybody will say it out loud. There are teases, there are aphorisms. I think there's a lot of burlesque in the Bible. And by burlesque, I'm not talking about how much clothes you have on, but having a kind of funny, big show in which people start laughing. So sometimes, of course, also imagination itself is humorous, absurdity is humorous, charm is humorous, irony is humorous, and so on. So here's from the Gospel of Luke. I'm going to read it in the translation from, what's it called again? The translation here is from the Annotated Scholars Version in the Complete Gospels. So that one we may want to talk a little bit more about the translation, but at the moment, here's their translation. Congratulations, you poor. God's realm belongs to you. Congratulations to you who are hungry. You will have a feast. Congratulations, you who weep now. You will laugh. I'll read it again. And you don't have to think about it as a joke yet. Congratulations, you poor. God's realm belongs to you. Congratulations to you who are hungry. You will have a feast. Congratulations, you who weep now. You will laugh. Okay. if you would just think for a little bit about those words, and just think, first of all, think what you think that they mean. And secondly, after going there, also think whether it's funny or not.
I see some sarcasm there. 'Cause if you leave off the second part and just say, congratulations. What was the first one?
You poor.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
congratulations, you poor. So who would congratulate anybody for being poor? So it sounds sarcastic. Congratulations, you're hungry, you know, so I can see that there. There could be.
Yeah, and
Twist.
congratulations, you who are sad, is the third one. Congratulations, you who are hungry. You're exactly right. That you, if you have some of your ears open, you'll notice, wait a minute. Other things that you'd like to, I mean, think back about, so this is, of course, blessed are the poor, blessed are the hungry, blessed are those who mourn. Those are that's the translations that are most used. I think probably the best translation, although I like the congratulations a bit, I think the most straightforward translation is probably happy are you poor, or happy are you hungry, or happy are you who weep. So what do you know about in your own life? What do you know about this, the meaning of this? In other words, what meaning, if some of you may not like this, and that's fine, meaning if you don't like this verse, that would be fine, because there are lots of verses that a bunch of us don't understand or like. But anyone want to talk about what it means, what any of that, the parts of those 3 sentences, or actually 6 sentences, mean to you?
Well, I think that it is irony in terms of humor, but I think it's also more a form of address. It's a dramatic technique to get people's attention, right? And to kind of compel people towards you to listen. It's kind of friendly in a backhanded way. And it gets people to be thinking, right? And it's very quick, and then it moves on. So to me, it's more of it's more of a theatrical, more of a dramatic address, and very effective. And then you've got their attention, and you can say whatever.
Yeah, Martha, you're really onto it. That's beautiful in a couple of ways. You insisted on noticing the irony, and then you really felt the dramaticness of it. And I don't think you need to choose between them. It seems to me like both of them are key to the humor as well. But thank you. Anyone else want to say a little bit more about the text?
You know, I'm probably totally humorless, but honestly, when I hear those words, and I feel like Jesus is saying to those who are mourning, that there's a lot of compassion in that. And I don't feel particularly funny about being poor or sad or hungry, but I feel like he's talking about, listen to me in a radical way, because I have something really new to tell you. So it's certainly, I hear the drama or the getting your attention, but I feel like if I were that down and out and someone came along and said, there's a happiness here, I'd be listening all ears. Okay, show it to me. Where is it? I don't see it. So I don't know if I'm just totally missing the humor, but I feel like, to me, it's a very powerful message of hope. So
But if you wanted them, if you were saying this to someone, I would want to say that if you wanted them to hear it, you wouldn't say, congratulations, you poor. Because
no,
that
I would say happy, you
Yeah.
poor. I go along with a happy one.
But even
That's what it-
there, if you would say happy are you poor, what would the poor be feeling like? Wouldn't that be kind of crazy feeling that someone said that to you?
I think,
If you're
I don't
poor?
know if I'm mistranslating or not, but for me, it feels like there's a happiness here I want you to see that you're not seeing. Like, don't miss that. I'm going to tell you something very different. So there's a happiness right where you are. That's what maybe I'm reading something into it that's not there too, but that's
No,
right.
don't let me talk you into anything.
Okay.
That I think it's, but this is where I would want to notice that the way this is prepared and brought to a poor person, I think Martha's noticing the irony. Would be really hard not to, if you were really poor, for you to think it's either to notice the irony and say, what do you mean? Or get mad at the irony because there's too much to say. I mean, it brings the happiness right in there and just puts it right alongside the poor. If it's, from my point of view, this is a kind of humor that is scary. So I would say this is something like the kind of humor that late night comedians do.
Well, he also reverses it. Like you are hungry now, but you're going to be fed. And he reverses it where, okay, he makes this statement, but he immediately says, this is what seems to be, you are poor, you're hungry or whatever, but I'm giving you what's going to reverse that. So he's not just leaving them with this statement of irony. He's giving them a promise, and it's almost, in the way it's sort of like laid out, especially more in Matthew, it's almost like an equation. It's like you got the one side, if you are poor, you will be rich. If you are hungry, you will be fed. It's more like an actual equation through God's law that you're going to be, this is going to be met. That's what I see with what he's saying.
Yeah, I think that has a real logic in it. And now we want to say some more about this being the law.
I wonder if this would tie into it. I noticed that the verse just before that, it said, Jesus raised his eyes to his disciples and said, happy are you who are poor. Now, whether any of them were poor or hungry or mourning, I don't know, but maybe it's part of his teaching them a way to address the crowds that were there just a couple verses before that, to not just be saying what they're used to hearing, but to really open their ears to think about what he's saying.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that Matthew has Jesus talking to everybody, and Luke
Really?
doesn't.
Yeah.
And Luke doesn't. Here, I will just settle for saying it seems to me that if I were saying this in front of a small group or a large group, I would have a twinkle in my eye that they would I would be putting them in a situation that has good news in it and who reminds me of not such good news. And that's the kind of humor that it feels to me would be there. It's a larger question, I think, for us to think about in terms of what it's like to be poor. I've spent a bunch of my life living with poor people. And I can tell you, getting complicated humor really helps a lot of folks when they get to laugh at their situation. Let's go on to another text, and this one's from the Gospel of Thomas. I know some of you with us in other months have done a bunch of study with of the Gospel of Thomas. I don't remember us talking much about this text that I'm going to read you. The realm of God is like a woman who is carrying a jar full of flour. While she was far away, the handle of the jar broke and the flour spilled out on the road. She did not notice it spilling. When she reached her house, she put the jar down and discovered that it was empty. That's the whole parable. It's not in any other text that we know of. I'm going to read it again. The realm of God is like a woman who is carrying a jar full of flour. So, in other words, the realm of God is going to be, we're going to learn about the realm of God when we hear what happened to her. The realm of God is like a woman who is carrying a jar full of flour. While she was far, the handle of the jar broke and the flour filled out on the road. She didn't notice it spilling. When she reached her house, she put the jar down and discovered that it was empty. Could those of you who have heard that parable before raise your hands or put your little hand raiser up? Okay. So it looks to me like we've got maybe 34%. So now, what in the world is Jesus saying? Just forget about humor yet, because some of you haven't ever heard this before.
May I ask a quick question about that, Hal? In our little Bible study group, we did look at that parable, and some people were asking, would it have been normal for someone to carry flour in a jar, in an earthen jar? Is that a normal way to carry flour around back then?
I don't think anybody knows that.
Fair enough.
But I think some did. In other words, no, I'm not even sure that I wouldn't. Because I think that the story is told to make people respond. So it could be that no one has ever experienced that before. So I'm gonna back out of me saying, yeah, I bet you a bunch of them did, and say I don't know.
If you're carrying a jar and the handle breaks, and you don't know it, then you weren't carrying it by the handle. You were carrying it some other way,
Mhm, mhm.
which
That's a
is
good point. Good point.
maybe on your head.
So notice actually we've had in all of these so far, there's drama and sadness in all three. So I want to just raise the possibility that humor and comedy in the middle of sadness isn't really to cheer us up, but to put us in a different frame of reference. And maybe have us face some things that we didn't want to. And there also, Martha, I think there's a lot of irony if you if this just happened. It's not like the worst thing that ever happened to you, but you're certainly not saying, wow, I'm glad that jar broke.
There's a little bit of trickery too, right? There's a little bit of fun, a little bit of trickery, right? And he's having fun with that. Well, this was what you thought was going to happen, and that's not what happened. Right?
Yeah, right.
Right. So the person who's telling the joke is having fun, right? So
That's
he's having fun telling that, right?
I really think absolutely. And I'm not sure that his hearers are all that, at least immediately, happy about what he just said.
Right.
So I mean,
what does it mean? What's he talking about, right?
I don't know about you all, but I have all kinds of accidents in the kitchen. I mean, there are so many times in which I break something or spill something. And I have to say that sometimes I'm swearing and sometimes I'm just not knowing what to do, and sometimes I laugh.
Right.
Anybody else ever laugh at having an accident of this nature? Not, in other words, nobody's killed, nobody's going to the hospital, but somebody just made a mistake. What if you laugh at that kind of thing, like a third of the time? Why do you laugh?
The surprise factor. She thought she was carrying it all the way home, and then she found it was empty. She'd lost it on the way, so she was surprised.
I laugh at myself when I do something like that. I don't always laugh, of course. I can swear a blue streak when some of those things happen, even when it's not much.
I have a kind of a question. During the first 10 minutes of this session, our fire alarms went off twice. Do you think Jesus could have made a good parable out of that?
Well, I generally stay away from psychologizing Jesus, but I do think that this is I think all three of these teachings so far are teachings in which the drama,
right,
the irony, and the possible hurt are all in play. And this is where I'm actually really into this entire project, because I find it doesn't seem to me that my cultures know very much about that. about looking at the irony, the hurt, and the drama of something that just happened, and learning to sometimes laugh about it. Yes, Helen.
But he used the word cathartic as a way of laughing about something like that, that it kind of releases the pent up frustration or sadness.
This is probably a bad idea, but I've preached on this text a number of times. And I find myself mostly wanting to think of this text as what happens when something goes wrong that's not too terrible. And it seems to me there that one of the things that where humor could enter is as a sort of a training run for being in a culture and a time when more things go wrong than right. But I'm going to give us the last text. This is also from Luke, because I liked its version a little bit better than Matthew's. He went on to say, what is the realm of God like? What is the realm of God like? What shall I compare it to? It is like a mustard seed, which the worker took and threw into the garden. It grew and became a tree, and the birds of the air sheltered in its branches. I'm not going to be able to do much with this. I'm going to read it again. I'm going to read you why this I think is funny. Jesus went on to say, what is the realm of God like? What shall I compare it to? It is like a mustard seed, which the worker took and threw into the garden. It grew and became a tree, and the birds of the air sheltered in its branches. So quickly, here's what I'd like to just say about the first century and mustard. It turns out, I think, and this is why it's funny, Luke's version is so funny if one knows both what a mustard plant is and what its role was in ancient Israel. It turns out that the way Jesus recounts it, it is a slapstick version of real mustard seed plants. It's a slapstick version of the life of mustard seeds. The first thing to know is that mustard plants were so common that they were treated more like weeds. Now, I just want to follow this up. So let's remember, so Jesus is saying that the realm of God itself is like this very common plant that's treated like weeds. It is not hard to find enough mustard seed in Galilee. Secondly, it was a fairly paltry plant, growing everywhere, but fairly scrawny. Notice then the quip and the burlesque way Jesus talks about it. The first joke is that Jesus compares it to the realm of God. You wouldn't think that the realm of God would be this weird, not very important weed. So what does he compare the realm of God to? A scrawny weed. He takes the grandeur of God into a plain, very plain plant that is not prized at all. The next joke is that the worker throws mustard seeds into the garden. How funny and crazy this is. The worker throws those seeds that are weeds into the garden. What's going to happen? Nobody needs mustard seed in their garden. They've got enough mustard everywhere. In other words, weeds are planted randomly in the garden. This is what God's realm is like. Then the parable becomes straight out ridiculous in that now the weed has become a tree in its growth. That's an impossibility. They're just not that big. This is then all the more ludicrous when the birds of the air come and rest in the branches of this exaggerated weed. They're not big enough either for the birds of the air. But most hearers now are really laughing because many of Jesus's hearers know that Jesus's version of the weed comes from a scripture plant from the book of Ezekiel 17, 22 and 23, which reads, "The Lord God says, a tall cedar tree I shall plant on a high and lofty mountain, and it will grow into the noble cedar tree." And that really is a mammoth tree that grows in Israel. And every kind of bird will live in it. That's what Ezekiel says about not the mustard seed or the mustard plant, but about a really big tree, cedar tree, that probably can hold 300 birds. So Jesus is burlesquing the tall cedar tree. Here I want to suggest that it's basically not everybody will get it if they don't know they won't get it as well if they don't know Ezekiel's passage, in which Jesus now is doing the same thing with the mustard seed that Ezekiel did with this beautiful, huge tree. And I want to say this about this as I have screwed up our time, meaning we don't have enough time. But this is a very humorous way of thinking about God's grandeur and God's realm. And so this is why I would call it a burlesque way of Jesus talking about it. It takes a stupid little weed and acts like that's a big cedar tree. So this is, it seems to me, this is classic Jesus for announcing the realm of God. And that is, it's not what you think.
What an amazing conclusion. Is not what you think.
I apologize for being so slow. I'm really a slow talker.
Well, I think you needed to be slow because I think you're bending us upside down and inside out. We have to adjust to the twist. It's okay. You gave us plenty to think about. It's not what you think. Well, anyway, so thank you so much, Hal. It's just great to have you exploring into new things that we just haven't thought about before, as always. So this was the October 2021 textual study on the Bible and Beyond discussions on humor and joy in Mark, Thomas, Matthew, and Luke, led by Dr. Hal Taussig. Once a month at 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday nights, generally the 4th of the month, we provide a discussion of one of the early Christian texts. Dr. Hal Taussig leads these sessions, sharing a well-framed overview of the particular text and allowing participants time to ask questions and share their insights. Donations supporting the creation of these textual study archives are greatly appreciated. We especially appreciate your consideration of a monthly pledge of support on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Bible and Beyond to make a pledge that's just right for you. You can also make a one-off donation using PayPal or a check if you prefer. Check the website earlychristiantext.com for details. Thanks so much, and we do look forward to seeing you next month. You might be turned inside out, who knows?